Welcome back. You're watching Political Exchange, where we continue our discussion on the forthcoming elections north of Limpopo. Now, of course, before the break, we spoke, quite in detail about some of the shortcomings of the processes and, of course, the implications that would have. I want to shift the discussion now and look at particularly the kind of bigger economic issues. We know that Zimbabwe's economy went into free fall. There was a period of stabilization, but there's a lot of hardship at the moment. Some initial indications that the chaotic land reform program did in fact yield results in some instances. Webster, from where you're sitting, what is the economic imperatives of this election? Are people going to be voting with their stomachs, so to speak?
I think if you listen to the rhetoric that is coming up during these campaigns, there is a strong emphasis on the economy, with the MDC pushing for reviving of the economy and creating employment, while on the other hand, ZANU-PF has got their empowerment mantra and also building on the issue of the land. So this election is basically on trying to move from a period of economic stagnation and decline that the inclusive government improved so far. So they are trying to build on it, and they are also both promising that they are going to deliver in that front.
Now, of course, it's easier said than done. We know from the crisis in Egypt, for example, with the bottom falling out of the Egyptian economy, that's the surest way to get thousands of people out on the streets, those who don't have work, those who are hungry, those who want petrol. Are the economic challenges, Professor Moore, that pertinent and that bigger factor in the way in which people will actually vote, given the political, dimensions of the economy? ZANU-PF driving a very aggressive indigenization campaign, and of course, in some instances, yielding some results.
Yes, I think at the last moment, though, people will be still voting along the lines of, do we still want this aging dictator? With the dollarization, the American dollarization of the economy, as the government of national unity began, things started to pick up. You didn't have that horrible inflation. But since then, I think things have been on a steady decline. The various public opinion surveys that were carried out by Freedom House and Afrobarometer, and another one by the IIRI, say that people feel the economy has been doing better, but it has been very stagnant. You need dollars, you need foreign, you need relatives in South Africa or the UK to send you money, that sort of thing. So, and the question of indigenization, I think, since it's a rhetorical device at the present, not too much has happened because of that. Nobody is quite sure what it really means. And I think the MDC is trying to say, well, no, this is just about the elite getting fatter at the trough. It's not about empowering the people. And so they have different lines there. The question of land, there was a book that came out in 2010. Everybody was delighted. Land reform was a great success. This book proved, apparently, that all these Western myths were wrong. However, the responses to that book by respected academics such as Bill Kinsey, who's been working on land issues for ages and ages, and Rukuni, another agricultural economist, they're becoming more and more critical about this. So it's you can't just say that because you got a piece of land, you're going to vote for ZANU-PF anymore. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a gut feeling. Will those militia around the corner scare you? Will the Chupangano, those youth gangs in the cities, will they be pummeling people and telling them to vote the right way? So it'll be a question of fear, of how we can be open, how can we express our openness, versus versus that. But I don't think the economic question is going to be really, it's going to hit the fan.
Webster, let me bring you in here. Of course, we know a lot about what is wrong with what ZANU has done in terms of governance and running the economy. The track record of the MDC is fairly patchy as well. Morgan Tsvangirai embroiled in a lot of political mudslinging, some of it sticking to him with allegations of graft and corruption. Of course, Tendai Biti receiving accolades for his management of the public purse in Zimbabwe. If the MDC emerges as the clear winner, does the party have political and economic policy and wherewithal to actually take Zimbabwe on a new trajectory?
My observation is that in terms of economic policies, these two parties are not very different.
Right.
If you look at even the land policy, the land question, the MDC admits that it is irreversible. If you look at the indigenization policy in their document, the JUICE document, the MDC admit that it is important. They only vary on the methodology. But critical now is the issue that ZANU-PF is controlling the levers of the economy. The land issue, the mining area, including the diamonds where they are getting their revenues. And although the indigenization program is still hasn't had any results, but they've articulated it so well to the effect that I think people believe in them, which is what we don't find with the depth of and conviction from the MDC. Although I would say, in terms of what they say about the economy, they are more or less the same. The issue has been who runs the economy. And that is where they differ, with counter accusations of corruption and counter accusations of lack of capacity and all that comes with it.
Okay, let's shift gear a little bit. Of course, everything that happens in Zimbabwe doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's SADC, of course, Zimbabwe's crises impact on its neighbors to varying degrees. South Africa, in many ways, carrying the can. Both of you have been involved in work around South Africa-Zimbabwe relations, a new book out. On looking back, Professor Moore, South Africa's role as facilitator, as key interlocutor on the eve of the Zimbabwean population going to the election, how would you rate what President Zuma's administration have been able to do so far?
Well, in 2008, when they had the SADC meeting in the DRC, everybody was hoping there would be great changes, that Zuma was going to take this old regime in hand and that he would do so much better than Mbeki. I think what it shows is that there's a lot of continuity in the relationships which have deeper structural resonance from the economy to a long history of flow of populations and so on. So there hasn't been a lot of change. The Zuma administration has had the GPA, the Global Political Agreement, which led to the National Government of Unity, has taken that and has perhaps pushed it a bit harder than the old regime would have. And with the result that people like Jonathan Moyle from months ago, and even years ago, has been screaming at Lindiwe Zulu, and now with the recent screaming from all over. I think the lesson that I think has been learned from this administration is be more transparent, be more democratic. Back in 2001, Thabo Mbeki wrote a long page, 26 pages about what was wrong with ZANU-PF. And you will never read a more critical, this was in the ANC 300-page document that went around that year. You will never find a more critical document. If you're a Marxist, and you criticize the government for relying on the lumpen proletariat for your support. That's what it says in that document. That's the worst insult that you can give any government. And at the end of that document, Thabo Mbeki said, we must have free and fair elections. Well, 2002 elections were not free and fair, I think we can say. Ibo Mandaza said yesterday at a meeting in Zimbabwe that ZANU-PF only got 18% of the vote. Right. Now those numbers are suspect. Anyway, if South Africa, at that moment in 2002, had walked in and said, this election was not free and fair, it would have created a big catastrophe. But 10 years later, where would we be? We might have had an MDC government in power for this long and people would know what the MDC was like. Not extremely difficult to run a government. There's no messiah that's going to come and save the people. But now we're at the same place we were 10 years ago.
Webster, there is often a tendency among South African diplomats to take the South African peace settlement and try and replicate it elsewhere, which is why we often speak about governments of national unity and so on. There's also been the suggestion from the South African side, of course, that South Africa cannot be Zimbabwe's liberators, that the Zimbabwean people need to take the helm and drive the change for themselves. We've got less than 2 minutes. Your assessment of the South African government's performance so far, given the fact that ultimately Zimbabweans will have to decide for themselves what kind of government, which government they want, and how they want to run their country.
I think the South African government has been put between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, they want to keep the sovereignty of the country intact. On the other, South Africa also feels the pinch of anything wrong that goes that happens across Limpopo. Given that, it is a very difficult situation for South Africa to outrightly condemn the situation in Zimbabwe. So you find there hasn't been megaphone diplomacy. There has been some underhand dealings around how the situation can improve without having to expose who is wrong and who is not. And this has been a difficult, delicate balance to keep, because the situation on the ground has been that South Africa could have done more, but also it has already done enough. Look, they almost opened their borders for Zimbabweans to come and do business here. They even gave permits during this period where they tried to regularize the influx of Zimbabweans here. I think those are some of the measures that they tried to share the burden with their northern neighbor, with the hope that the situation would improve.
Okay.
But beyond that, I think it's also within the SADC architecture, peace and security architecture, which is still developing and which is still very weak. So we end up relying on South Africa as a country instead of SADC as a regional grouping.